Alright, so today I want to give some focus and spotlight to the 4-star characters of Honkai Star Rail. I know a lot of the time that we really only focus in on the 5-star characters, which I don't blame a lot of people for because of how good the 5 stars are, but there are still some really solid 4-star characters. So today I'm going to be doing a ranking of all of the 4-star characters in the game on a tier list, and I think this is going to be really helpful not only for casual players who may not have so many characters built, and these could be some interesting options for them, but also for newer players as well, who are probably getting a few of these characters for free, whether it be through permanent free characters or during events where there are 4-star selectors. So this can definitely be a great resource as well. So for this list, I am splitting it up into 4 categories. Firstly, on the top, we have the insane value category. These are going to be the best of the best for the 4 stars, and just will give you a lot of value in a lot of situations, or are going to be really good overall to have. And the next category down here is the has potential category. These are characters that under either certain circumstances, or if they are just very niche, but have a either pretty strong performance or can be very good in very niche situations. So they don't have as much value as the tier above them, but I still see people running them and they can have value in certain places. Then for the second to last tier here, not great but not awful. These are characters that at least at a time were really good, but now they're kind of just there, not really performing as well as they used to, but aren't like complete zeros. Like I think especially I'm gonna factor in like early game as well. If you are a beginner player, there are gonna be some characters in here that are going to be decent options for you to start out with, but they will get kind of phased out over time. Then lastly, we have You're Cooked. These characters are just the absolute zeros. If you get them, you probably don't want to invest in them unless you are like a very early player and you have nothing else. So without any more stalling here, let's get right into the tier list. So starting out here, we have Preservation March. At this point, honestly, I'm gonna put her in the You're Cooked tier. She just, at the beginning of Star Rail, she was like alright as a sustain, but very quickly you kind of realize that it is a bit, not as great to run her as a sustain character because she has preservation, and that's just because she only can shield one ally at a time with her skill. So she'll use her skill on one ally, and then she'd have to wait for her next turn to skill on another ally. And with the way that fights are now, with how many blast and AoE attacks from bosses there are, plus how strong attacks are as well, her preservation is not cutting it. So there's just way better sustains, so I don't think you should really be running Preservation March. Next up we have Hunt Dan Hung, and he is also going to be cooked just because Hunt Dan Hung is a single target DPS character, and while single target isn't like a complete zero anymore with newer characters like Dr. Ratio, Fei Xiao, and Topaz, being a 1.0 Hunt character and a 4-star at that, his damage really just doesn't cut it for where the game is right now. Obviously, if you have like a super crazy level of investment in him, you might see him do a little better. But I think that for most players, you aren't going to be using Hunt Dan Hung. You're going to be using some other DPS characters, likely some of the limited 5-star DPS characters, to do a lot more damage. Then next up we have Asta, which despite how crazy Harmony supports have been and how she's kind of fallen, not because she has gotten worse, but because just general supports have gotten better, I'm going to put her in the has potential tier, because I think that there could be a point with investment where you have you're running a sustainless comp with 2 characters that are giving insane buffs, and then you use Asta to increase your speed. And I think that's really important because she does give a team-wide speed buff on her ultimate, which is a really good thing, honestly. I feel like that's the main thing that really puts her in this tier for me. She definitely is not as good as she was towards the beginning of the game, but I think especially for someone who either may not have many supports, or if you are trying to do certain things with speed and get some more actions, Asta has a pretty big speed buff. So I think as a 4-star, she's really not, that bad in all honesty. And considering you get her for free as well, that is definitely really good for her too. Plus she also has some attack buffs built into her kit as well for the team, and having team-wide buffs is definitely nice. And I think, once again, like, getting the limited harmonies is definitely the way, but having Asta is still a very solid early option for people. So I am going to put her in the has potential tier. And of course, with speed getting more important with a character like Aglaya coming up, for example. Now, Asta's nowhere near her best setup, but for people who don't have, very many supports, I could see someone running like Tingyun and Asta, which we'll get to Tingyun when we get to her on the list here. But next up, we have Arlan. I feel like I don't even have to explain this one. I think a lot of people in the community, we already know. Arlan is just not a very good DPS, and a lot of DPS characters are going to fall in this bottom tier here just because of how much the game has progressed with HP inflation, with the end game, and also with the strength of limited 5-star DPS characters. So, yeah, Arlan, just like Dan Heng, doesn't really cut it anymore. But now we have the one DPS exception for the 4 stars, which is Herta. We're going to put Herta in insane value here. Our first top tier character for the 4 stars. And the sole reason for this is because of pure fiction. The first reason for this, because now there's 2 reasons. With pure fiction, she became extremely good because of her AoE, not only her skill, but her follow-up attack. And even with my Herta not being like super well built, she has carried me to several pure fiction clears. So the fact of that, plus also you get her pretty much, I believe you can get her either to E6 or like very high Eidolons just from doing like the simulated universe clears. You can have a pretty strong Herta if you invest in her, regardless of what point in the game you're at. But then if you are a player who invested in getting the Herta, she ends up being a pretty solid sub DPS for her as well, and also fulfilling the erudition requirement. So Herta stocks definitely have gone up very recently, and I don't expect her to really like fall off that much, in the next couple patches or so, because she is valuable for other game modes besides what everyone is looking at, which is MOC. Because MOC is the main mode for Star Rail, and I think that Herta is going to perform extremely well in pure fiction for a long time, unless the HP inflation gets too out of hand there as well, which I'm hoping not. I'm hoping that's just going to be like a mainly MOC and like minorly apocalyptic shadow thing, but that's a conversation for another video here. Then next up, we have Hook. She's going to go in the bottom tier here as well. I think that Hook is a character that honestly didn't get enough love at the start of Star Rail. I feel like no one was really talking about her, at least from what I saw. And her kind of being like a damage dealing kind of character, it just did not really work. I don't have as much experience with Hook to really like give specifics on that, but Hook literally I never saw be super amazing, and especially with being like a more damage dealing kind of character, she's gonna fall in that same tier with Arlan and Dan Heng. The HP amount and the amount of investment you need for a 1.0 DPS to actually do a lot of damage for you is really high, and there are just better options for 4 stars. Then next up we have Natasha, the first abundance healer you get. She's going to go in the not great but not awful, because while she is one of the worst sustained characters now with how good we have some of the newer limited sustains, she is still, not only is she a free sustain, but she also is she is a healer that can heal your whole team. And a lot of people will be using her early game, but she is going to fall off in the late game. She's not an absolute zero, because of the fact that she does fill that sustained slot, which is beneficial for players. But there's absolutely 2 better options that we're going to get to later on as well that do what she does, but better. Then next up, we have Sampo, which is a very interesting case. He's going to go in the not great, but not awful tier, just because while Sampo himself is not necessarily like a bad character, I'd say, he's being held back by the fact that Dot has not received a single like Dot specific buff since version 2.0. It's been pretty much a year at this point since we've gotten a Dot buff, and Dot is Sampo's playstyle, so that hurts him as well as the limited Dot characters. So he is kind of struggling there. If we get Dot buffs, if we get like a dedicated Dot support or something like that in the future, then I could see Sampo gaining a little bit more relevance. But we will have to see what they end up cooking up. But Dot has been dead for about a year now, which is pretty crazy to think about. So that's gonna place him in that tier right there. Hopefully we eventually move him up to has potential, but right now he's going to be not great but not awful. He's kind of just there. Then next up we have Pela. Pela is going to go insane value. She has been super good since the game came out. She has AoE defense shred, which is a really crazy debuff to have. And while that was good, just to start, then we got Acheron, and she has always been a very strong character to run alongside Acheron to not only get Acheron stacks, but to also just increase the overall damage that Acheron does as well. Plus, also factoring in that she is Nihility for that buff there. So I think that regardless of what you're running in your account, plus also just AoE defense shred is crazy. I think really most teams that you can slide Pela in, she's going to perform very well. And I think she is a very strong character to have for a 4-star character. Then next up we have Serval, which Serval, I'm not going to lie to you all, literally before version 3.0, I would have put her down here in the You're Cooked. But now, with the newer Serval build that people have been using with the Herta, and I feel like we get other characters that can also benefit from, characters doing their ultimates or using a lot of actions, I think that Serval is going to be up and has potential here. Because now, rather than her being built like a DPS, which is what a lot of people did leading up to, the present day, Serval is now being built as a more energy battery because of her low energy cost. If you have enough energy regen on her, she can ult, I believe it's either every turn or every other turn, which is absolutely crazy for a character there. So if you need ultimates to battery a DPS character, Serval is going to be a very great pick. Since I believe it's her signature light cone, the 4-star signature for Serval that gives extra energy, and then also just running a general energy regen build for her, you're going to get a lot of ultimates with her. And if there's characters that benefit from that, I think she could do very well. So I definitely think she has potential to just be that kind of sub DPS energy battery, which is a pretty cool kind of character, honestly. So we do love to see that for her. Next up, we have Qingque, aka Qingque. I'm going to put her in not great but not awful because, leading up to before version 2.0, she was hitting pretty comparative numbers to some of the better DPSs in that day. Well, obviously not Imbiber Lune or Jingliu, but she was still kind of holding her own in terms of DPS. Now she has definitely fallen off a bit, plus her kit is very RNG based, which can be a bit annoying, as I'm sure anyone who has played with her knows. And she also really does need her E4 to really be doing those crazy levels of damage. So because of that, because her kit has pretty solid damage in it in comparison to some of the other DPS we put in the tier below, she's definitely in a kind of spot where she's not dead in terms of viability, but there's so many other characters that are going to do more than her and are going to do that more easily than she can. So she's going to be not great but not awful. If we get some kind of support that makes her more consistent later on, then that could help her out a lot and also give her more damage. But for right now, she's just kind of there. She can probably, clear some content, but I wouldn't get my hopes up for her to be able to do everything unless you have a crazy amount of investment on her. Then next up is Sushang, and I think she's in such a weird, place because obviously, she was a kind of DPS character, but I've seen people transition to more of a break-centric build. But as much as I would love to have tried Sushang earlier on, which I didn't really get to, but from what I've seen and what I've looked up for Sushang, I do sadly have to put her in the You're Cooked tier. She's just not doing it as a break character. There's a better break 4-star character already for physical, and she does have some cool stuff in her kit, like action advance. I could see the argument for not great, not awful for Sushang, but I think compared to some other characters, she's not providing enough. And hopefully, something can happen to give her a little more viability, because she is a fun character from the bit I've used of her, but she's not really giving as much to any of the teams she's on, honestly. Then next up we have Tingyun. Tingyun is going up into insane value. She's been up here since day one because she is able to not only have some very strong buffs for one character, for your main DPS, but she can also increase their, give them some extra energy. And also, if you pair her with a dance build, which I've been using ever since I got my Tingyun, you can also have some pretty solid action advance for the entire team, which sure you can do that with any Harmony character, but for Tingyun it works super well because of also the buffs and energy gain that she gives to get a nice burst of damage as well if you can bring your entire team up to the front of the action order. So she does kind of, fall a bit behind some of the more recent supports like Robin, Ron, May, and so on, but she is still a very strong character, and if you don't have a ton of the limited harmony characters, I think that she is an absolute run character for a lot of people. And since she's a 4-star, if you pull on a character who has her as a side banner character, then getting Tingyun will be pretty helpful, I think, to pretty much anyone. But now on the other side of the harmony spectrum here, we have Yukong, who is absolutely cooked and has been cooked since day one. There was, this character did have some cope, which, to be fair, she wasn't like awful and an absolute 0 on day one, but seeing her kit with the way it works for like more like a burst damage character rather than being like longer sustaining buffs, it just didn't work. And the way her buffs worked, she basically has her buffs up for 2 of your allies' attacks when you have 3 other allies, which is a strange thing that not only do you have to put in more effort to speed tune her, which, by the way, like her buffs, like on paper, like she gives crit buffs, I'm pretty sure, which are pretty strong, but because you can barely have them up without having proper speed tuning, it can be very rough to actually get the max value from Yukong, especially when you have other support characters, even other support characters on this list that are able to do her job better and more consistently than she ever could. Even with them at E6, and if you have like Tingyun at lower Eidolons, I think that Yukong is just not a great character, and she should have been designed better, is what I think. Next up, we have Luka. Now, Luka is going to be not great, but not awful, because while he is like, he's not doing the same damage as like better, DPS characters, and also because he is kind of like a dot character, people just shied away from using him as dot, which honestly is fair because a more break-centric build for him can put in some work as long as you position it right and you do have to have a good amount of investment now with how high some of these HP stats are, but because of how strong physical break is and also how strong Luka's just general mechanics are as well, he can do some pretty solid attacks as long as you line up those breaks with him. Stronger than Sushang for sure, and yeah, he can just generally do some solid damage. He is, there are much better break characters in the game now, but he kind of was the original like pioneer of like running a break centric team. So plus pairing that physical break damage with how strong bleed is, Luka can do some numbers in comparison to other 4-star DPSs. So he's definitely going to be kind of like in a limbo state here. We'll see if he gets any kind of buff, but honestly I highly doubt it for how Luka's kit works. But now let's move on to Lynx. Lynx is going to be I'm going to put her in the has potential tier, because Lynx is basically a better Natasha with more utility, because she does also have the increased taunt value, which uses her skill on a destruction or preservation character, which are the tankier paths in the game, and also just having some solid healing, solid cleansing as well. So she is able to do a good amount for the team. Her healing amounts are actually very similar to Natasha's, but I think that the added utility in her kit as well is very helpful for certain characters, especially if you're running like a destruction DPS, or if you are running you probably wouldn't be running a preservation support with her, but mainly for those destruction characters she could be very good. For a character like Blade, for example, who wants to get hit, it's going to increase that chance. So yeah, Lynx definitely has potential if they release more destruction characters that do want to get hit, but we will see what they do there. Next up, we have Guinaifen, who is a kind of interesting debuffer with the like damage taken increase debuff, and I'm going to put her in not great but not awful, because I think that if you're someone who doesn't have very many Nihility characters and you need a debuffer, Guinaifen can be a good pickup. I wouldn't even say great, because we have a character like Pela who's also a 4-star, but honestly these two, because they have different debuffs, if you are running like a super free to play kind of like Acheron team and you don't have like Jiao Cho, for example, you don't have Black Swan, running these two together honestly is not a bad idea at all, because you do get 2 different types of debuffs on the enemy, which will not only increase Acheron's stacks for her ultimate, but you're also just going to get more damage out of it. So yeah, Guinaifen definitely not like bad, definitely not like a net zero, but if you have some of the better Nihility characters, you pretty much won't be using her. That's kind of what happened to me. Once I got some more Nihility characters, I have not used Guinaifen in at least a year, pretty much. Like I used her a bit when Black Swan came out, but that's about it. Then now we have Hanya, which you guys got to hear me out here. This might be a little bit of my hot take here. I think she is a not great but not awful. She's not Yukong tier where her kit just doesn't work. Her kit works really well, but she had two, she has two, I guess, I don't want to call them problems, but two things that kind of just kept her down and didn't really, make people talk about her. The first thing being, she released right before Ruan Mei, meaning that we knew what, literally like a week after she came out, we had the live stream where they showed Ruan Mei's kit, and Ruan Mei is just, leaps and bounds better than any other support character in the game. Then for the other thing for Hanya, she is at her best if you just have a boatload of speed on her, which also will make people have much higher like levels of investment. And that is something that I think is probably fine in the long run, but it is a little bit better now, but now that it has been a while that people have been able to, play for longer, get better speed relics, there's just multiple better supports now than Hanya. Plus, her main gimmick being the skill point regeneration, Sparkle does that just better a lot of the time. Since you can get a Sparkle buff, a Sparkle ult once every like 3 turns with the right build. So, and that gives you back way more skill points plus a higher skill point maximum. So Hanya is just kind of there. But I'm not going to lie, because I do have a Hanya built, she does get me through some pure fiction stages with physical weaknesses, so definitely don't count her out if you have some Eidolons in her, and you have some good speed pieces, to definitely like at least get her over like 160, but she can do some work for you if you have her built, and if you need a, physical character in pure fiction as well, she can definitely be a good pickup there. Then next up we have Xueyi. We are almost done here, because of the, crazy gap we had between, not having any 4-stars released in SRL. But we have Xueyi. Xueyi is also going to be a not great but not awful. He was the first character who was actually like supposed to be designated for like a break kind of playstyle. And while she is of course nowhere near as good as the like 5-star limited DPSs for break, I think that she can still do some pretty decent damage with her follow-ups. If you have her E6, I feel like it kind of completely changes her playstyle because you end up getting more of her follow-up attacks and getting a lot more damage. But the thing that keeps her kind of lower is that, similarly to some other characters, she does take a higher amount of, investment and work to be as good as other characters are with a lot less investment. So if you have other options for a break-centric team, they probably will just be better than Xueyi and be a lot more worth your time and resources than Xueyi. But if you really want to run break and she's the only one you have, she can still do some decent damage, especially with how good Super Break is as well. So Xueyi is, not a 0, but there is just better. Then we have Misha, who is the other character besides Sushang, who I was super conflicted. But I think I'm also gonna put, actually instead of Sushang, being in You're Cooked, Misha is actually going to go in Not Great, Not Awful. And the reason for this is because Misha's kit actually, in theory, seems very good, because you are able to get some solid freezes on his ultimate, you use your skill to build up the amount of hits his ultimate can get, and you can deal a lot of damage. But the issue with that is, the actual multipliers for his ultimate damage per hit are kind of low, so if you're running into a fight with 3, 4, 5 enemies, your ultimate really isn't going to do that much damage. You might get some freezes, which is cool, but if you're running him as a kind of damage dealer, you're not going to be getting too much out of that. He is going to work in those situations more so as a like sub DPS kind of character, and just generally getting those freezes so you can get some more actions before the enemies can act. But where Misha is really going to thrive is a single target fight, where all 10 of those hits can go onto a single enemy, because if you can get all 10 hits of his ultimate on one enemy, the damage actually ends up being pretty good. But there is no content in the game right now that wants you to fight one enemy. So that's where Misha kind of struggles. If we get content in the future, I can see Misha being a nice like niche pick for people who can do a lot of damage to that single enemy. But of course, I feel like they have to be Ice Weak. If they're not Ice Weak, it doesn't make sense to bring him. But yeah, because of that, he does have, I think he does have the potential to move up a tier if we get that kind of content at Star Rail, which honestly I feel like we've been asking for single target content for a long time. So hopefully we do get something for him. Then honestly, these last three here, I'm going to move them all and then talk about them, you know, one by one, but they are all in insane value, all three of them. And honestly, March and Mose are kind of together, so I'll talk about them together. But first for Gallagher, he is one of the better sustained in the entire game. And honestly, I'm pretty sure the either second or actually no, he's the third best healer in the game. Forgot about Ho-Ho for a second. But Gallagher is still a really insane healer. And a lot of his healing doesn't actually come from him, you know, just like popping skill to heal a character, which you can do in certain situations and you might need to in certain times. But a lot of the time for Gallagher, his healing will come from you using his ultimate on the enemies and then having your allies attack the enemy to get the healing from them. Because he basically has, I don't want to call it like a lifesteal mechanic, but they do heal whenever they hit an enemy with Gallagher's debuff. And, you know, having that, but also him being a break character as well, that does give him some really good synergy for the break comp. But at the same time, I've used him on other comps, like I've used him with like Fei Shao and a follow-up comp, and I've used him with Dot as well. He could be a good sustain anywhere he is. He doesn't like rely on the break, but break is going to be his best overall comp for, you know, just for his abilities there. But as a healer, I rarely have situations where I, you know, lose with Gallagher, and that, I feel like that is just pretty insane to think about as well. So he is a very strong healer and the strongest 4-star healer by far, I think. I think he's miles better than Lynx and Natasha. But yeah, that's why he goes in that tier. And then for March 7th, the Hunt March 7th and Mose, both of them are follow-up characters and are very good, and both also actually have pretty unique playstyles as well, where March 7th designates she acts like a sub DPS who designates the main, either a main DPS or another character on the team as her Shifu, and both of them receive, you know, they both receive certain benefits from that, and March is able to like charge up and enhance basic attacks through both her actions and her Shifu's actions, whereas Mose, he will use his skill and leave the field, but after every 3 follow-up attacks, I believe every 3 either attacks or follow-up attacks, I haven't used Mose in a while, but he will be able to do a follow-up of his own and just be a sub DPS in that front. And both of them work extremely well and honestly are at a pretty similar level to Topaz, who's like a premium follow-up like sub DPS, when used with like Fei Shao, who is the best follow-up character right now. And judging by how much they've given us for follow-up attacks over, you know, the 2.0 versions, I definitely think that follow-up can also just be on the come up even more. And if we get another follow-up like main DPS, I think March 7th and Mose are still going to work extremely well. So, especially since also for March, her and all of her Eidolons are free. So you're going to be able to get a really strong sub DPS out of her. And if you do get Eidolons in Mose, he can perform on a pretty comparable level as well. So that is my overall ranking for all of the 4-star characters. I know this video was a lot of yapping, but let me know what you all think in the comments down below. I definitely am interested to see what you all think. Again, these are just, you know, my opinion at the end of the day from my experience with the game and what I've seen and what I know. But thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed and want to see more content from me, be sure to hit the subscribe button. But with that, everyone, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.